Okay, so in the previous video, we recapped Jesus' prophecies about the coming of the Son of Man and judgment on the temple in Jerusalem, which his apostles asked him about. And we read about all the signs he gave them, all the things. And that all applies to the period of time between when he spoke that and when it happened 40 years later, okay? And then we went back to Daniel 2 and Daniel 7, and we read the overall scope of history from Daniel's day down to Jesus' day, when he was going to establish the kingdom in the days of the Fourth Empire, which was Rome, which was ruling the world at this point in time. And Jesus established his own kingdom during that time, which is going to eventually shatter all the other kingdoms and scatter them to the wind so they're never seen again, and rule the world instead. Okay? So that is happening. As Paul is speaking, this process is playing out. Jesus has come. He has established his kingdom. His apostles and his missionaries are spreading his good news of his victorious reign. Okay? But there is still a beastly kingdom in control in the form of Rome. Now, to understand more about like this boastful horn, this little horn, this ruler who's speaking boastfully, we're going to read a little bit of a history lesson here in the next couple of chapters of Daniel, which will help us understand more about this figure who speaks boastfully. In Daniel chapter 8, Daniel has another vision. He has another appearance, prediction of the future, and this in particular is about the empires who are going to rule the world after Babylon, the ram and the goat. The ram stands for Medo-Persia, and the goat stands for Greece. Daniel is still alive when the Medo-Persian Empire takes over from Babylon. He will not live to see the Grecian Empire take over from Medo-Persia, because that's 200 years later. But he sees this in vision form. And as he sees this ram and this goat, and this ram tramples the world, and then this goat comes and smashes into pieces, which stands for Greece. Daniel 8, verse 8, the goat became very great, but the height of his power, his large horn, that stands for Alexander the Great, was broken off. And in its place, 4 prominent horns, which are the 4 generals who divided up the empire in Alexander's death, after Alexander's death, grew up toward the 4 winds of heaven. Out of one of them came another horn. So out of those 4 horns, 2 of them went west into Europe, and they really weren't an issue for the Israelites. But 2 of them were right next to Israel. One of them was in Syria, right north of Israel, and one of them was in Egypt, south of Israel. And these 2 fought each other all the time. And they would use Israel as a bridge to get to each other. So Israel was affected by these 2 kings, these 2 horns. And out of one of them, the northern one, the Syrian one, came another horn, which started small, but grew in power to the south and to the east and toward the beautiful land. This is a specific individual in history known as Antiochus Epiphanes IV, and he lived in the 100s BC. It's a couple of hundred years before Jesus' own time. And this is a specific individual who lived in history. He was a king of the north of Israel. He was a king of the Syrian Seleucid Empire, and he was fighting the Egyptian Empire, the Ptolemies down south, and he was going back and forth to Israel to do it, and he eventually turned his attention toward the Israelites themselves. He hated them. So it grew until it reached the host of the heavens, and it threw some of the starry hosts down to the earth and trampled on them. It set itself up to be as great as the prince of the host. So this is this individual ruler of this particular part of the empire, Antiochus Epiphanes IV. It took away the daily sacrifice from him. He desecrated the temple and stopped the sacrifices for 3.5 years. And the place of his sanctuary was brought low. Because of rebellion, the host of the saints and the daily sacrifice were given over to it. So somehow or another, the faithlessness of the Jews brought about, at the time, in the 170s AD, brought about this result. Because of that, the host of the saints and the daily sacrifice were given over to it. It prospered in everything it did, and truth was thrown to the ground. So he's asking, so then he gets the interpretation of this particular dream from Gabriel. And he says, Gabriel says, as he's interpreting the various dreams, he says, The shaggy goat is the king of Greece, and the large horn between his eyes is the first king. It's Alexander. The four horns that replace the one that was broken off represent four kingdoms that will emerge from his nation, but will not have the same power. In the latter part of their reign, when rebels have become completely wicked, there's the idea of rebellion again. A stern-faced king, this is the horn that grew out from earlier, a master of intrigue will arise. This is Antiochus Epiphanes IV. He will become very strong, but not by his own power. He will cause astounding devastation and will succeed in whatever he does. He will destroy the mighty men and the holy people. He will cause deceit to prosper, and he will consider himself superior. When they feel secure, he will destroy many and take his stand against the prince of princes. Yet he will be destroyed, but not by human power. So that's the guy who's going to do all these things and did all those things in the 160s BC, and he was eventually overthrown, and the temple was rededicated and cleansed and rededicated and used again. It was not destroyed. The temple at that time was not destroyed. It was defiled. The sacrifices were stopped, and it was defiled, but it was not destroyed. And Antiochus Epiphanes eventually came to his end, and then the Jews reclaimed the temple and restored it, cleansed it, and reinstituted the sacrifices again. We're going to read a little bit more about Antiochus Epiphanes now. Daniel 10, 11, and 12 are all one section. Daniel has a vision, and he gets a vision of this great and glorious being who will explain to him in great detail the next several hundred years of history as it pertains to Israel, and the king in the north, which is the Syrian king, which would eventually result in Antiochus Epiphanes IV, and the king of the south, which are the Ptolemies, and their doings with each other. And Daniel, so he goes into great detail about that. That's what Daniel 10 and 11 are about, and into chapter 12. And he eventually gets to the principal figure in this section, which is Antiochus Epiphanes IV, the guy we just read about in Daniel 8. This part of the Grecian, Syrian, Seleucid kingdom that terrorizes Israel so much, which would happen in history in the 160s BC. So we go back to this guy in chapter 11, verse 21. He, the current king who's come and gone now, will be succeeded by a contemptible person. This is Antiochus Epiphanes IV again, who has not been given the honor of royalty. He will invade the kingdom when people feel secure, and he will seize it through intrigue. Then an overwhelming army will be swept away. This is basically panic and peace and safety, but there is no such thing. Then an overwhelming army will be swept away before him. Both it and a prince of the covenant will be destroyed. After coming to an agreement with him, he will act deceitfully, and with only a few people he will rise to power. When the richest provinces feel secure, he will invade them, and will achieve what neither his fathers, the previous kings of the north, nor his forefathers did. He will distribute plunder, loot, and wealth among his followers. He will plot the overthrow of fortresses, but only for a time. With a large army, he will stir up his strength and courage against the king of the south, which is Egypt, the Ptolemies. The king of the south will wage war with a large and very powerful army, but he will not be able to stand because of the plots devised against him. Those who eat from the king's provision will try to destroy him. His army will be swept away, and many will fall in battle. The two kings, with their hearts bent on evil, will sit at the same table and lie to each other, but to no avail, because an end will come at the appointed time. The king of the north, Antiochus Epiphanes, the same guy we've been talking about, will return to his own country with great wealth, but his heart will be set against the Holy Covenant. He will take action against it and then return to his own country. This is when he takes the action we read about in chapter 8 about setting himself against the prince of the host and taking the sacrifices. At the appointed time, he will invade the south again, but this time the outcome will be different than it was before. Ships of the western coastlands will oppose him, and he will lose heart. Then he will turn back and vent his fury against the Holy Covenant. He will return and show favor to those who forsake the Holy Covenant. There's that rebellion again idea as well. His armed forces will rise up to desecrate the temple fortress and will abolish the daily sacrifice. They don't destroy the temple, but they do desecrate it. They do defile it. and they abolish the daily sacrifice for a time. Then they will set up the abomination that causes desolation. With flattery, he will put he will sacrifice a pig in the temple and put an idol in there, basically, is what he does. With flattery, he will corrupt those who have violated the covenant, but the people who know their God will firmly resist him. So this desecration, this abomination that causes desolation, what Jesus is talking about, is referring to here. And that links back to an actual historical figure who occurred in history. Now, in Daniel's day, that figure is hundreds of years down the road. In Jesus' day, it was hundreds of years in the past. Okay, Antiochus Epiphanes did this in, I think, 164, 67 BC or something like that. Daniel's getting this vision in the 540s BC, so this is 300 plus years down the road from his day. Jesus is speaking in the year 30 or so AD, so it's 200 or so years behind him in his day. This was a figure who came and went as it was prophesied, and he did these things. And that is the linking, that's the link here between what Daniel was talking about and what Jesus is talking about. The abomination that causes desolation, this desecration of the temple. Antiochus Epiphanes did not actually destroy the temple, but he did desecrate it, he did violate it, he did leave it desolate. Those who are wise will instruct many, though for a time they will fall by the sword, or be burned, or captured, or plundered. When they fall, they will receive a little help, and many who are not sincere will join them. Some of the wise will stumble, so they may be refined, purified, and made spotless until the time of the end. For it will still come at the appointed time. So this guy is going to come to his end. Then we want to talk about this dude, and we start transferring our focus from this Antiochus Epiphanes to the kings of the Roman Empire to come, the fourth beast that is still to come in days, and that's the people who will be in charge, the kingdoms that will be in charge when Jesus sets his own kingdom. So we're going to make that transition here, starting in Daniel chapter 11, verse 36. The king will do as he pleases. Now we're kind of shifting our focus from Antiochus Epiphanes IV to the Roman emperors. He will exalt and magnify himself above every god, and will say unheard of things against the God of gods. He will be successful until the time of wrath is completed. For what has been determined must take place. This is what links it up with 2 Thessalonians 2, by the way. This will make sense when we get to 2 Thessalonians 2, why we're talking about this. He will show no regard for the gods of his fathers, nor for the one desired by women. For nor will he regard any god, but he will exalt himself above them all. Instead of them, he will honor a god of fortresses, a god unknown to his fathers. He will honor with gold and silver, with precious stones and costly gifts. He will attack the mightiest fortresses with the help of a foreign god, and he will greatly honor those who acknowledge him. He will make them rulers over many people, and will distribute the land at a price. I'm going to skip the next paragraph and just say at the end, yet he will come to his end, into verse chapter 11, he will come to his end, and no one will help him. At that time, this is Daniel chapter 12, verse 1, Michael, the great prince who protects your people, will arise. There will be a time of distress, such as has not happened from the beginning of nations until then. That sounds a lot like what Jesus was talking about in Matthew 24, huh? But at that time, your people, everyone whose name is found written in the book, will be delivered. Multitude, that sounds like this. So there's judgment on one hand, and salvation and deliverance on the other. Like the day of the Lord, in other words. Multitudes who sleep in the dust of the earth will awake. Some to everlasting life, others to shame and everlasting contempt. Those who are wise will... So this is resurrection here. He's talking about the resurrection here. Those who are wise will shine like the brightness of the heavens, and those who lead many to righteousness like the stars forever and ever. But you, Daniel, close up and seal the words of the scroll until the time of the end. Many will go here and there to increase knowledge. He doesn't understand this, so he goes on to ask a few verses down, what will the outcome of all this be? And he gets the reply, go your way, Daniel, because the words are closed up and sealed until time. So it won't affect you. It won't happen in your day, Daniel. These words are sealed until the time of their fulfillment. Many will be refined and made spotless and pure. Many will be purified and made spotless and refined, but the wicked will continue to be wicked. None of the wicked will understand, but those who are wise will understand. Actually, I missed the important verse. Right before that, it says, the angel says, when the power of the holy people has finally been broken, all these things will be completed. So and this is what makes it difficult sometimes for these prophetic passages that are talking about more than one thing at once. We read about this when we read through the prophets before, so this shouldn't be new. Okay? Again, you can go back and look at my videos about Isaiah and Ezekiel and Zechariah 14, and some of these other places where we see like this idea of multiple events in history kind of being condensed into one thing, even though in the actual course of time they take place at different points. We see it happen in Daniel. He's talking about Antiochus Epiphanes, but then he starts kind of talking about the days of the Roman Empire and the crisis that's going to come again when the temple falls again in the days of the Roman Empire, and saying that the power of the people, the holy people, will finally be broken at that time. We're going to go back to Daniel 9 now, before we finally turn our attention back to 2 Thessalonians 2. We have one little bit more in Daniel to read. In Daniel chapter 9. This is when Daniel is praying about the restoration of the temple. He knows it's about time for something to happen to allow, the Babylonians have fallen, the Medes have come. And Daniel knows from what God has already revealed in the past that pretty soon the Jews, his people, should be able to go back to their land and rebuild their temple. So Daniel 9 has this long prayer from Daniel for God's sake, for God's name, for the glory of God's name to make that happen. We're not going to read this prayer, but we're going to go down to Daniel 9, starting in verse 20, and read the response he gets from the angel Gabriel. While I was speaking and praying, confessing my sin and the sin of my people, Israel, and making my request to the Lord, to my God, for his holy hill, while I was still in prayer, Gabriel, the man I had seen in the earlier vision, came to me in swift flight about the time of the evening sacrifice. He instructed me and said to me, Daniel, I have come now to give you insight and understanding. As soon as you began to pray, an answer was given, which I have come to tell you. You are highly esteemed. Therefore, consider the message and understand the vision. So he's asking about the Jews being allowed to go back to build the temple. That's what he's asking about. He's not asking about anything more than that. He's going to get an answer that is about more than that. He's going to get more than he asked for. But his actual ask is about letting the Jews go back to build their temple again. But here's the answer he's given. 77s are decreed for your people and your holy city. So he's not going to get just the timeline for the Jews to go back to build their temple, but far beyond that. So here's what the point of these 77s are. To finish transgression, to put an end to sin, to atone for wickedness, to bring in everlasting righteousness, to seal a vision and prophecy, and to anoint the most holy. So all these things are going to happen in this period of time. Know and understand this. From the issuing of the decree to restore and rebuild Jerusalem, which is going to happen soon enough, until the anointed one comes, the ruler, that's the Messiah, there will be 7 sevens and 62 sevens. It will be rebuilt with streets and a trench, but in times of trouble. We read about that in the final books of the Old Testament, Ezra, Nehemiah, Esther, Haggai, Zechariah, and Malachi. Then there's a long period of silence, the 62 sevens. After the 62 sevens, the anointed one will be cut off and will have nothing. That's the crucifixion. The people of the ruler who will come will destroy the city and the sanctuary. That's the Romans who come to destroy the city and sanctuary again, like the Babylonians have already done. That happens in the year 70 AD. The end will come like a flood. War will continue until the end, and desolations have been decreed. Another abomination of desolation. It happened before, it will happen again. He will confirm a covenant with many for 1 7. In the middle of the 7, he will put an end to sacrifice and offering. I believe this is still referring to the Anointed One who makes a new covenant, and one that no longer requires humans to go to the temple to make sacrifices and offerings, because Jesus' own sacrifice satisfied that requirement for all. Now, the standard rendering of this next sentence, I think, is wrong. So we're going to go down to the footnotes and read the alternate rendering, which I think is more accurate to the point of this next verse. And on one who causes... Wait, hang on, where are we? And one who causes desolation will come upon the pinnacle of the abominable temple, until the end that is decreed is poured out on the desolated city. So there's going to be another abomination of desolation. And that is going to be, that's what Jesus is talking about. There's already been one, okay? We've already had a concrete example given of this in the book of Daniel, multiple times, pointing to the figure of Antiochus Epiphanes. And that's going to happen again. Jesus said it. That's going to happen again. Okay? And Luke refers to this as the surrounding of Jerusalem by armies, which was an actual event that occurred in history when the Roman and Judea war was just starting, and the first commander, whose name I currently forget, I always forget his name. Every time I look it up, I forget it immediately. All these weird Roman names. He surrounded the city of Jerusalem, but did not attack it, and in fact returned and left, which gave an opening then for whoever was still in the city to get out. Now, a lot of them didn't. A lot of the Jews had rebelled, okay, and they were falling away, and they were begging for a fight. In fact, it got to the point where the Jews, the hardline Jews who wanted to fight, stayed in the city, and they would keep other Jews from escaping. They killed more of their own citizens and countrymen than the Romans did. But there was a period of time in which it was still possible to get out. And Jesus said, when you see that happen, you go. And that is the coming of the Son of Man. That's the abomination of desolation. Okay? And that is what Paul is talking about. I don't know how much of this he went into detail about when he talked to the Thessalonians during his 3 or 4 weeks with them. I'm imagining it would have been somewhat lower on the totem pole of priorities. I'm assuming he would have talked about baptism and repentance and purity and sin and things like that first. I'm assuming he was talking about that first. And giving up their pagan ways and their idolatrous ways. Or he would have reasoned with the Jews to see Jesus as the fulfillment of their scriptures. I'm assuming that all this talk about the coming of the Son of Man and the abomination of desolation and the boastful evil one, the man of lawlessness, I'm assuming that would have been down the list of things. But it would have been there, okay? And what Paul would have, the sermons he would have spoken on that, the teaching he would have given them on that, would have been the same that Jesus said to his apostles in Matthew 24. Okay, that would have been the same message. We see links of it with when we read Matthew 24 and compare that to 1 Thessalonians and 2 Thessalonians, we see many of the same elements shared between those messages. So even though Paul wasn't there for that, that was clearly part of the Christian message, and he was speaking that to people. That's what he was talking about. So when the Thessalonians, are asking about these things, that's what they're thinking of, and that's how Paul's going to respond. He's going to respond based on his initial message that he spoke to them, which would have been the same message that Jesus said to the apostles in Matthew 24. And they would have been asking questions based on their misinterpretations of that message, and he would have been setting them straight based on that message that he had spoken to them. And that comes from Matthew 24, which itself is drawn from Daniel chapter 7 and the rest of the book of Daniel. Okay? Whew. I say all that so that when we get to 2 Thessalonians 2, we can understand what he's talking about. And that's what we're going to do next.